How do human beings constitute themselves as subjects? It is in these terms that Michel Foucault recently defined his work of the last 20 years. Indeed, the constitution of subjectivity undoubtedly provides the perspective from which the more familiar Foucauldian concerns with power and with the history of sexuality can best be understood. For if the fundamental exercise of power over individuals is their own confessional interpretation of themselves, then a study of networks of power inevitably leads to a dismantling analysis of the technologies of the self, to what Michel Foucault has called a genealogy of the subject in Western societies. This extraordinary enterprise has led to crucial reevaluations on the part of Michel Foucault of political freedom and resistance. If we are acted upon most effectively by power relations internal to our own sense of ourselves, then the resistance to power must perhaps take the form, ultimately, of an unprecedented, non-ascetic, perhaps anarchic form of self-repudiation. Michel Foucault's study of the culture of self is therefore inseparable from the prospect of promoting new forms of subjectivity. And it is as part of this ambitious and exhilarating project, a project of militant scholarship, that Michel Foucault, currently Regents Lecturer in the French Department, will speak to us this evening and will, tomorrow, answer questions in English. There will be no questions tonight, in an open discussion meeting which you are invited to attend at 4 p.m. tomorrow in Moffat 102.
I would first like to thank the Regents Lecture Committee and the Department of French, and of course my friend Léo Bersani. And I would like to tell my friends in Berkeley how glad I feel to be back among them. In a dialogue written at the end of the 2nd century after death, Lucian presents us a certain Hermotimus, who walks mumbling in the street. One of his friends, Licinius, sees him, crosses the street, and asks him, "What are you mumbling about?" And the answer comes, "I am trying to remember what I have to tell to my master." And through the conversation between those two, Hermotimus and Licinius, we learn that Hermotimus has been visiting his master for 20 years, that he is nearly ruined by the very high cost of those precious lessons, and we learned that Hermotimus may need 20 years more to arrive at the end of his training. But we learn also what those lessons are about. Hermotimus is taught by his master how to take care of himself in the best possible way. I am sure that none of you is a modern Hermotimus, but I hold the bet that most of you have met at least one of those guys who nowadays regularly visit a kind of master who takes their money from them in order to teach them how to take care of themselves. But fortunately enough, I have forgotten, either in French or in English or in German, the name of those modern masters. In antiquity, they were called philosophers. In order to explain why I am interested in the theme of the culture of the self, as a philosophical and as an historical question, I'd like to take as a point of departure a short text written by Kant in 1784. The text is Was ist Aufklärung? Enlightenment. This text was an answer to a question published by the Berlinische Monatsschrift, and at this same question, Moses Mendelssohn gave also his own answer, which was published 2 months before Kant's answer. I think that a certain attention has to be paid to this text. First, it is worthwhile to underline that the German philosophical movement through Kant and the Jewish Haskalah through Moses Mendelssohn met at the same moment on the same topics, Was ist Aufklärung? It is also worthwhile to pay attention to this kind of philosophical interrogation about the present. Of course, I know that it is not the first time philosophers ask questions about their own present, about the historical or religious or philosophical meaning of the present. But most of the time, those interrogations deal either with a comparison between the present moment and a previous one, or those interrogations deal with the announcement of a future through some signs which have to be deciphered. Most of the time, the question about present is a question about decline or improvement, proximity of a new age, or arrival of the promised last days. In Kant's text, the question is put in terms of a very specific achievement in the general history of reason, or more precisely, in the general history of the way we use our reason. And this kind of interrogation is interesting on 2 grounds. First, the first reason is that the 18th century is very often credited with the universal conception of reason, and this assumption is correct. But the 18th century has been also aware of the historical changes in the use of reason, and the representation Kant gives of those historical changes is very different from a simple progress of development of reason. But I think that there is another justification for paying attention to the text written by Kant about enlightenment. This text, I think, has introduced, in the field of philosophical reflection, a new kind of question, the question of the nature, the meaning, the historical and philosophical signification of the which he is himself a part. I don't mean that previous philosophers were not aware of their own present and that they did not worry about it. Hobbes, Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz took into account their own situation and the situation of the contemporary world, as Plato did or Augustine. But for Descartes, the failure of several so-called sciences, for Hobbes, the political situation of England, for Leibniz, the religious debates and quarrels, were reasons for them to intervene and try to change something in such a situation. I think that Kant's question about Aufklärung meant something else. At the same time, Kant gives a justification of his own philosophical task through analyzing the actuality which he belonged to, and he gives as a target to his philosophical work to play a certain role in the natural, in the spontaneous history of reason. In this short paper about enlightenment, Kant raises a set of questions which I think are characteristic for modern philosophy. And those questions are: what is our actuality as an historical figure? What are we? And what do we have to be as part of this actuality? Why is it necessary to philosophize, and why is it the specific, and what is the specific task of philosophy in relation to this actuality?